From Vermont Public, this is The Frequency. I'm Abigail Giles, filling in for Mitch Wertlieb. It's Tuesday, March 4th. Happy Town Meeting Day. Here are today's headlines. Middlebury is seeking voters' support for several water infrastructure bonds today. The largest of the bonds is for a roughly $50 million upgrade to the town's wastewater treatment facility. Emily Charrington is the director of engineering for the town. She says Middlebury's plant is about halfway through its expected lifetime.
Essentially, the difference between spending the money in a planned and efficient manner versus spending the money to put out fires is significantly less. And so that's really what we're intending to do with this bond vote.
Middlebury voters will also decide today about whether to approve a $1 million bond to upgrade a pump system that currently floods and causes wastewater discharges. Voters in Burlington, Killington, Chester, and Proctor are also weighing water infrastructure bonds today. U.S. Senator Peter Welch is calling on Republican colleagues who have backed Ukraine in the past to speak out against President Donald Trump's, quote, radical new change in policy favoring Russia. A bipartisan group of about a dozen senators, including Welch, met with Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky on Friday to offer support for his efforts to secure a peace deal with Russia. That was hours before a confrontation in the Oval Office between Trump, Vice President J.D. Vance, and Zelensky. Welch is calling on his GOP colleagues to help get peace talks back on track.
I've got a number of Republican colleagues who've been on the forefront of standing up for the United States helping Ukraine, not with boots on the ground, but with weapons and support along with our European allies.
Welch says any ceasefire deal between Ukraine and Russia should include a provision where the United States guarantees the security of the agreement. State scientists are proposing changes to Vermont's regulations on hunting waterfowl like geese and ducks. The state wants to keep bag limits for ducks consistent while cutting the bag limit for Canada geese from 3 birds per day to 1. David Sawsville is with the Vermont Department of Fish and Wildlife.
And that's because we saw a drop in the breeding pairs, the population that's up in the tundra up in northern Canada.
Sawsville says late snowfall in the Arctic can make Canada geese lose their eggs for the year. The state is also proposing splitting the duck season for Lake Champlain into 2 periods after surveying Vermonters who want to hunt later in the year. The Fish and Wildlife Board will decide whether to approve the new regulations. You can weigh in at public meetings starting on March 11th in Whitehall, New York, and March 13th in Essex Junction. The deadline for public comment is March 31st. And the top law enforcement officer in Caledonia County has died. Sheriff James Heeman had a rare form of cancer. That's according to a statement shared by the Caledonia County Sheriff's Department Sunday afternoon. Heeman was elected sheriff in November 2022. He had been a member of the department for 17 years prior, and he worked at both the St. Johnsbury and Lyndonville police departments. Jack Harris is chief of the Lyndonville Police Department. He worked closely with Heeman, who he hired.
When he worked with me and even after, because I worked side by side with him as a sheriff, he's someone that really cares about the community and is willing to put in a lot of time, a lot of dedication just to help his community out.
Heeman also served as a school board member and as a member of the board of directors for Northeast Kingdom Human Services. He is survived by his wife and 2 daughters. Coming up, voters are considering school budget proposals across Vermont today. Education reform has been a big focal point in the State House this year, after nearly 1 in 3 school budgets were voted down last year amid property tax spikes. But many education officials say lawmakers need to focus on healthcare too, in order to chip away at the cost of running Vermont's schools. More on that after this.
Thanks for listening to The Frequency, where support comes from VITA, supporting business growth and innovation in the Green Mountain State. From agriculture to manufacturing, energy to food production, find solutions that turn your business dreams into reality. Visit VEDA.org and see how VITA can help make it happen.
Talk of education overhaul continues to dominate conversation at the State House, but things are much quieter when it comes to healthcare reform. Education officials, meanwhile, argue that without intervention, health costs will only continue to cannibalize ever larger shares of local school budgets, no matter what cost containment measures Montpelier decides to impose on districts. Vermont Public's Lola Dufour joined Mary Angish to talk about the intersection of healthcare and education.
Lola, Vermont has the highest premiums for employer-sponsored healthcare plans in the country and some of the highest hospital prices. So is it similarly bad for school employees?
It is. I expected the numbers to be bad, but I was still pretty startled by what I found. Between 2020 and 2025, premiums for school employees skyrocketed by more than 65%. The Vermont Health Education Initiative, which manages insurance for educators, forecasts that collective costs for these plans will surpass $383 million next year. Now, educators themselves are absorbing about 20% of that $383 million figure because that's the share of their premiums that they're on the hook for. But what's left over is still a huge chunk of what Vermont spends on schools. The Vermont School Boards Association pointed out that in 2018, a little less than 10% of your average school budget was spent on health benefits. Now that figure is closer to 15%. And at that pace, we'll be at 20% in just a few short years.
What kind of impact does that have on the ground?
Well, just earlier this week, I reported on a school district that's planning to repurpose an elementary school. And I thought it was notable that the cost savings they're expecting from consolidating an entire school is roughly equivalent to the extra money they'll have to pay towards health insurance next year. We can't oversimplify what's going on. There are other really important cost pressures at play in Essex-Westford, the school district I wrote about, including a recent retooling of Vermont's education funding formula and, declining enrollment. But it still points to a general trend you hear from school officials, which is that because the cost of care is growing so fast, much faster than inflation, it's crowding out the system's fiscal capacity to do much of anything else.
Lola, is anyone proposing to do anything about this?
The governor has basically said that, between education and housing, his administration has enough on its plate this year. He told reporters earlier this month, we can only handle so many crises at once. And he's also suggested that maybe the legislature or the Green Mountain Care Board or key players in the health industry should take the lead.
And what about Democrats? What are they saying?
Democrats in the legislature are exploring certain reforms, including a move to reference-based pricing, which would cap what providers can charge for procedures. That's something that the teachers union, the Vermont NEA, has really pushed for. But Democrats are also trying to manage expectations about what they can achieve. And unsurprisingly, they're also pointing the finger right back at Scott.
That was Vermont Public's Lola Dufour speaking with host Mary Angish. To read more of Lola's reporting on education reform, head to vermontpublic.org. Thanks for listening to The Frequency today. We had additional reporting from Nathaniel Wilson and Brittany Patterson. Our executive producer is Kevin Trevelyan, and our music is by Blue Dot Sessions. I'm Abigail Giles. Talk to you later.
Each morning, it's a new opportunity, a chance to start fresh. Up First from NPR makes each morning an opportunity to learn and to understand. Choose to join the world every morning with Up First, a podcast that hands you everything going on across the globe and down the street, all in 15 minutes or less. Start your day informed and anew with Up First by subscribing wherever you get your podcasts.